Hey guys, it's Miss Vinson. Today we're going to talk about consumer and producer surplus. Now first let's talk about consumer surplus. Consumer surplus is the difference between how much you're willing to pay for something and the price that you actually do have to pay. So let me give you a quick example. Suppose that you go into the store and you're going to buy a new pair of jeans. When you walk in the store, you figure you're going to have to pay about $40. So you're willing to pay $40 when you walk in the store, but when you get to the cash register, maybe the cashier says, "Hey, did you know these jeans are on sale? You don't have to pay $40 for them, you have to pay $30 for them." Notice how there's a difference between the price you were willing to pay for the jeans when you walked into the store, which is $40, and the price that you ultimately paid at the cash register, which was $30. There was a $10 difference or a $10 savings. In this case, we would call that a $10 consumer surplus. Now, everybody loves a bargain, and this really is the basis for things like Black Friday and Cyber Monday deals. Everybody's trying to get more consumer surplus. Everybody wants to pay a lower price than the highest amount that they're willing to pay. Suppose that we have 4 guys, we'll call them John, Paul, George, and Ringo. Maybe it's the 4 Beatles. And pretend that they are bidding on some musical item in an auction. So, a lot of times when people are going to go bid at something on an auction, they have in mind the highest amount that they would be willing to pay for that item. So let's say that we happen to know this information. The highest amount that John was willing to pay for this item is $100. The highest amount that Paul was willing to pay is $80. George's maximum amount that he'd be willing to pay for this item was $70. And Ringo said, man, he can't pay a penny over $50. So we could take this information and make a really quick informal demand schedule. At any price higher than $100, the quantity demanded would be 0. None of these guys would be willing to pay more than $100. Now, if the price were in the $81 to $100 range, there is one person who would be willing to buy this item in that price range, and that would be John. But since the price range is $81, that's still too high for Paul. Suppose in the price range of $71 to $80, now there are 2 people that are willing to buy this item. Of course, John is still willing to buy the item. Man, he said he'd pay $100, so he'll definitely buy it if it's in the $71 to $80 range, and so will Paul. So the quantity demanded at this price range is now 2. If the price lowers again, say this time from $51 to $70 in that price range, John would still be willing to buy it, so would Paul, but we also picked up a new customer. George said he would be willing to buy it in that price range. Finally, guys, if the price is $50 or less, then all 4 of these fellas would be willing to buy this item at that price level. Now let's take a look at how this might appear on a graph. So on the y-axis, the only prices we really care about in this example are the prices that these guys said they would be willing to pay for this item. So that's 100, 80, 70, and 50. On the x-axis, which measures quantity or quantity demanded, well, there's only 4 guys in our example, so we're just going to go 1, 2, 3, 4 there. Now check it out. At any price level above $100, we said that was too expensive for any of these guys to want to buy this item. So our demand curve that we're going to start to draw is going to be right there on the y-axis. The quantity demanded is 0 at any price higher than $100. Now, once we hit the $100 mark, we do get one person who said they'd be willing to buy this item, and that's John. Now, let me ask you this. Right now, John said he would be willing to pay $100. Let's say he wins the auction, but he has to pay $100. Is he really getting any savings there? No, his consumer surplus is 0, right? Because there is no difference between how much he was willing to pay and the price that he had to pay. So his consumer surplus was 0. Well, if we lower the price, let's say we're going to lower the price to the $80 range. Now in the $80 range, instead of one person, now we have 2 people that are willing to buy this item. Now notice what's happening here. John was willing to pay $100, but he only has to pay a price of $80, so he actually has a $20 savings or a $20 consumer surplus. Paul, he said he'd pay $80, he has to pay $80. Paul doesn't have any consumer surplus right now. If we lower the price again to $70, then notice what is happening. John's consumer surplus is going to continue to grow, and we're also going to pick up a third buyer. When we lower the price to $70, we pick up George. Now John's consumer surplus has increased to $30. Paul also has some consumer surplus now. He said he was willing to pay $80, now he's only got to pay $70. So he has a $10 bonus or a $10 savings or consumer surplus. Right now, George has no consumer surplus at a price level of $70. Finally, let's lower our price one last time to a price range of $50 and everything below. Now at the price of $50, all 4 guys are willing to buy this item. But some people are getting more consumer surplus than others. Now John has a $50 consumer surplus. Paul was willing to pay $80, now he only has to pay $50, so he's getting a $30 savings or a $30 consumer surplus. And even George is getting a $20 savings or $20 consumer surplus at this point. Ringo doesn't have any savings. He's just paying the $50 that he said he would pay. This stair-steppy line is downward sloping, and actually, guys, you can think of it as a demand curve. So our demand curve represents the highest amount that these fellas were willing to pay for this item. But the price that they actually do pay is going to be represented by the actual price line. Now, in this case, our price line ended up at $50. So notice how consumer surplus on our graph is the area below the demand curve and above the price line. Now, our demand curves don't normally look like stairs. So if we have a regular downward sloping demand curve, consumer surplus is going to be a triangular shape area, because again, it's still the area below the demand curve, which represents people's willingness to pay, and above the price line, which is the price they actually do have to pay. So if you're given a demand curve on a graph, then you may be asked to find the area of consumer surplus. Basically, you're going to be finding the area of that triangle on the graph. Now, you may have not thought about area of a triangle in a while, but remember, it's just 1/2 base times height. So I always like to think of it as the vertical side times the horizontal side divided by 2. But if you want to think about it as 1/2 base times height, that's fine as well. Let's talk about producer surplus. Now, I know it's kind of weird to think like producers, but producer surplus is the difference between how much it costs somebody to produce something and how much they are going to get paid for it. So you can almost think of producer surplus kind of like profit for producers. Suppose that we are making sweaters, and let's say that it costs you $10 in materials just to buy the cloth and make the sweater. And the lowest amount that you're going to be willing to sell that sweater for is $10, right? You got to at least break even. You got to at least cover your material costs. But nobody wants to just break even. When you make that sweater for $10, it might be your hope to sell it for $50. Then you have made a $40 profit or a $40 producer surplus. Now let's have another example. Suppose instead of 4 fellas, we're going to have 4 ladies. And these ladies are cleaning houses from top to bottom, underneath everything, dust. They are cleaning the whole house. Let's say that we have Mary, Georgia, Frida, and Grandma. And now each one of these ladies has a certain amount of money that they have to make, that they have to receive just to break even, just to pay for their mops and brooms and all of the chemicals and everything they use to clean the house. So let's say that Mary has to get at least $350 before she would even consider cleaning a house. Suppose that Georgia has to get $250 just to break even. That's her production cost. Frida has to get paid at least $200, and then Grandma has to get paid at least $100. So we can make an informal, really quick supply schedule. None of these ladies would be willing to clean my house for any less than $100. They can't. Otherwise, they'd be making a loss. So suppose that I offer them a price of $100 to $199. Well, there is one person who would be willing to clean my house in that price range, and that would be Grandma. Now, if I were to offer these ladies a higher price, maybe I were to offer them a price in the $200 to $249 range. Well, Grandma still would definitely do the job for that price. And I also pick up Frida as a person who would be willing to supply her cleaning services. So the quantity supplied in that price range would be 2. So if I go up into the $250 to $349 range, then there are actually 3 ladies that would be willing to clean my house in that price range: Georgia, Frida, and Grandma. Now finally, when I go up to a price that's higher than $350, if I offer these ladies any price level higher than $350, then all 4 ladies will be willing to clean my house at any of those price levels above $350, because they would all be able to pay their production costs. So if we took this information and we decided to plot it on a graph, of course we know that price is going to go on our y-axis. So the only prices we really care about in this example are the prices that these ladies say they have to get just to clean the house. And then on the quantity supplied axis, we're only going to go to 4 because in our example we only have 4 ladies. Well, at any price level below $100, none of these ladies were willing to do the job or clean the house because they wouldn't get paid enough to cover their production cost. So any price level below 100, the quantity supplied is going to be 0. But once we hit that $100 mark, there is 1 person willing to supply their cleaning services, and that is Grandma. Now right now, if Grandma says she has to get $100 just to break even and we pay her $100, she doesn't have any producer surplus. She's just breaking even. Now let's increase the price. Suppose we go up to the $200 range. There's actually 2 ladies that will be willing to clean the house at that price range: Grandma and Frida. Now look at what's happening. Grandma said she'd do it for $100, but now that she's getting paid $200, she's got a $100 producer surplus or profit happening there. If Frida's getting paid $200, she's just breaking even. So she has no producer surplus. So let's increase the price again. Maybe now we increase it to $250. 3 ladies are willing to supply their services at this price level. Now look at what's happening with Grandma. She was already an existing supplier, but her producer surplus is just increasing. We see that Frida now has some producer surplus, and Georgia, if she's getting paid $250, is just breaking even. Finally, if we increase that price level one more time to any price level $350 and higher, then all 4 ladies are willing to supply their cleaning services. So Grandma now has $250 of profit or producer surplus. Frida now has $150 of profit or producer surplus. And Georgia now has $100 in producer surplus. Now notice that stair-steppy upward sloping line, that's actually our supply curve. That supply curve represents the lowest amount that these ladies would be willing to supply their cleaning services for. In other words, it's how much they have to get just to break even. But the price level that they actually get paid at the end was $350. So notice how producer surplus ended up being that area above the supply curve and below the price line. Now you know that our supply curves are not like a set of stairs. If we were to straighten out our supply curve and make it more upward sloping like we're used to, then of course that is going to end up being a triangular shape. So producer surplus, just like consumer surplus, is also a triangle. So to find the area of producer surplus on a graph, again, you're doing area of a triangle, you would just throw down 1/2 base times height. Now if we take a graph of our market, remember how we were finding equilibrium? Notice, guys, that when we draw our equilibrium price line, that now creates a triangle on top and a triangle on the bottom. Notice that when you draw that equilibrium price line, the triangle on top is above the price line and below the demand curve. That's your consumer surplus. That's people's savings. And the triangle on the bottom is a triangle that's above the supply curve and below the price line. That's your producer surplus. That's the amount of profit that sellers are making. Now when we add together all the surplus that's happening in the market, consumer surplus plus producer surplus, then we get something called total surplus. And now when the market's at equilibrium, we do have a large amount of surplus. So when markets are in equilibrium, they're seen as being efficient because consumers are getting the most consumer surplus they can and producers are getting the most producer surplus they can. Now we're going to do a lot of practice with consumer and producer surplus, and this is going to be a topic that just keeps popping up over and over again in microeconomics. But luckily it's one that's pretty easy to understand. All right guys, hope you got it. See you later.